I think you gotta unmute yourself there, Alex. There he is.
I'm back. Welcome back to the Poor Sports Podcast.
How's it going? This is a new hat to the podcast. I know this. We got like a metallic Mariners logo. What's the shirt?
Yeah.
Can I see the shirt?
It is here we go. Let's see.
Oh, baby.
It's the All-Star Game shirt from this year. Yeah.
I love that. It's like retro style. It almost looks like the Seahawks the throwback uniforms.
I saw this shirt at the All-Star Game festivities, and it was like the only thing I wanted. Most of the All-Star Game stuff, it's like typically not great quality. It's kind of all, it used to be back in the day for any big sporting event, there was like 1,000 different designs, all sorts of merch, right? And now everything gets unified. It's all like Nike or Fanatics or, it's all streamlined stuff. But this one stood out, so I had to get this one.
Did you ever play in like Little League All-Star tournaments where there would be like what now would look like a mobile meth lab that was printing shirts for it would have like they would have the every roster and then they'd put the stars next to your name. That was the big selling feature.
I had a few of those shirts growing up, and it's wild now. I mean, in the internet age, that'll never happen again. It's like, here's the name of every child in town on the back of a T-shirt.
Well, only the supple athletic ones, actually, it turns out.
Yeah, it was. It's kind of crazy that we ever did that in the first place. My parents can be their own kind of way, but they didn't even want me wearing like the team hoodies with the last name on the back. They were like, dang. They were early adopters of the be afraid of everybody movement. And now that you can look up and see where all the sex offenders live near your house, I think everybody's like in line with that. But man,
where do you fall on? Because there's almost like every bit of data supports that it's safer to live than it's ever been, but we all are more scared than we ever were. So which is it for you? Were we just like stupidly ignorant before, or are we overprotective now?
Yeah, it was just ignorance back in the day. I mean, now it's like, now if you let your kids go outside and run around, like every house on the block has some sort of security camera that you could theoretically see anything happen, right? Like we could all go back, like back in the 90s, no one had security cameras. Like rich people might have had security. That was about it. But now it's like, man, everything's available. It's the information. It's the information age. Everyone's scared.
This is we got Robert Cashmore, by the way. I know him, Robert Cashmore, a comedian, weighing in with what up, Mudasucka. Thank you for keeping it clean on the podcast. This is a family program. That's why we're talking about child abductions right now, is because this is a family program. Speaking of child abductions, I'm at home with my child right now, so this podcast could get preempted by that, and I'd like someone to abduct her at this point. We've had her. She's these kids that you'll find this out as you get them back into daycare is like you pay for a month of daycare and you're lucky if you use 75% of the days of daycare.
I know about the daycare crisis. I'm all too familiar with it because of friends who have young kids in daycare. Look, I think we all appreciate our daycare workers. It's nice that you're willing to take care of other people's kids for money. That's awesome. But also, they really have the market cornered on a racket right now. There's nothing you can do about it. If the daycare says they're taking the day off for whatever, because some kid got a cough or whatever, nobody can stop.
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, my kid had like 100 0.5 degree fever yesterday, and so now she's got to be home for 2 days because it's got to be 24 hours removed from her last fever. So I'm hoping she's asleep right now. It's the only reason we're able to do the podcast. I have a very narrow window to do this podcast in, which means I think we got to get to some topics. Before that, though,
it's a lot of topics today. Big day.
March 15th, 16th, we're recording a special at Tacoma Comedy Club in Tacoma, Washington, 6th and Proctor location. Come on out to that. I need you there. I need you there more than I need anything in my life, to be honest with you.
Wow. I won't be there, so.
Well, yeah, not you. Anybody but Alex. Alex is banned from the club, actually. He had a real incident. Yeah. I did a show last night where a woman insisted that I needed to get a hysterectomy over and over again. So if you want to check out Casey McLean Comedy on YouTube, got a hot clip coming your way pretty soon.
Where was this show last night?
I was at a restaurant in Port Orchard, Washington. I was opening for my friend Gabriel Rutledge, and they were rowdy.
I know that Gabe Rutledge is like a pretty big draw these days. No offense to you.
Yeah. No, he's blowing up, as he deserves to, by the way. He's like 25 years into comedy and one of the best in the country.
Yeah, pretty big act, pretty big name these days. And but Monday in Port Orchard, that's got to be... It's got to be an interesting group of people that show up.
Yeah. Well, first off, it's apparently the only comedy show this place does. They have Gabe every year, which is a great choice. I've been to a bunch of these events with him where they're like, we don't even really like comedy. We're just Gabe fans. I did a show at the Elma State Fair where I literally was on the back of a cattle trailer with like a horrible PA. The mic cord was like 6 feet long, so I had this huge trailer as a stage, but I could barely move away from the speaker. I've done a bunch of wild gigs with Gabe, and he's like starting to not do the craziest gigs, but he used to be like a say yes to everything kind of guy. Sure. And he is to his detriment a lot of times before, and now he's finally starting to filter some of those out. Hopefully they'll matriculate down to a piece of shit like me, you know?
Yeah, you're there for the sloppy seconds. Let's not
give me those sloppy seconds. I have no pride at all.
No, sometimes those are the best, you know?
Yeah.
Take what you can get. All right, what do we got today? We got so many things.
So many things. Well, we talked about it. We've talked about it ad nauseum at this point, but Ryan Grubb is finally the Seahawks offensive coordinator, and we have citizen journalism to thank for breaking the story. We have we're not allowed to say the big game's name, so I think we call it the Deep State PSYOP, and the leader of that PSYOP did not get proposed to.
The Super Bowl and the NCAA tournament have gotten way too weird about who can and can't say their name. It's
dude.
It's if you're making any money off an event, you cannot use the name of Super Bowl or March Madness.
We are in the clear.
Yeah, obviously we're good. We can say whatever we want. But it's crazy, man. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and then so then I want to talk about, or we have this on our topic sheet at least, what Patrick Mahomes' legacy looks like at this very moment, because there's a lot of this conversation about if he's already the GOAT. And by the way, the GOAT, we got to get rid of the GOAT. I'm done with the GOAT. Can we we don't need to abbreviate it, but also like, where does he rank? Because, and we'll talk about that later. And then finally, the star of the Super Bowl. There was a lot of stuff that happened at the Super Bowl. Taylor Swift was the topic du jour. I think that's an appropriate use of French for a lot of people, and I think you and I are kind of aligned that I'm pretty agnostic on Taylor Swift's. By the way, I think she's this was the highest viewed Super Bowl I think in the history of the Super Bowl.
It was the highest rated TV program since the moon landing, apparently. So if you believe that the NFL is scripted, you might also believe that the moon landing is scripted. Very interesting time for you. I did find it funny that this morning, Pearl Jam announced the tour, and all the same people that maybe they might have been cool with Taylor Swift, but a lot of people probably weren't cool with Taylor Swift for losing their mind over a Pearl Jam tour. And it's like, this is Taylor Swift for middle-aged men.
Did you catch any of the Black National Anthem discourse, by the way? Because what I noticed about the Black National Anthem discourse is quite often the same people who said there's only one national anthem, there's not two national anthems, are also the same kind of people who support people showing the Confederate flag, which is very confusing to me because
look, I didn't actually catch any of the anthem. I wasn't really paying attention to the
not the anthem itself. I was cooking during every commercial and all that stuff.
I understand. We sing about a dozen songs before every big sporting event now.
Yeah.
And look, at some point, the type of people that only want to sing certain songs like the anthem, opened up the doors to all songs. They want
Sure.
now everybody. It's like a talent show before any sporting event occurs, which is fine. If we're going to go down that road, then it should be available to everybody. It's like they only want the anthem or their special song sung. It's like that's just not how it works, man. There are songs for everybody. We've decided we're going to sing songs before sports, even though
Yeah.
they have no relation to one another. And it's like we're incorporating the arts and the sports people. These people typically don't mesh, but we're going to do it anyway. So I say, if we're going to sing the national anthem, we should sing all songs. If someone wants to get up there and just start freelancing karaoke, I'm fine with that at this point, because what else are you going to do pregame? There's nothing else going on. I don't want to watch the players warm up. It's boring.
Yeah. All right. So I want to start with the Ryan Grubb to offensive coordinator situation, because this is a move that you and I, or at least I wanted from like a team perspective. I think you wanted it from a fuck Kalen DeBoer perspective. One thing that's kind of funny to me, by the way, is that this has turned into people being like Ryan Grubb somehow made a decision to honor the city of Seattle and not just to like enrich his bank account, and that he somehow shares the city of Seattle's contempt for Ryan DeBoer, when that's probably like his most meaningful professional mentor, probably a great friend of his, someone he'd probably go to the mat for. And everyone in Seattle is mad at Kalen DeBoer, but I think Ryan Grubb probably owes him a huge debt of gratitude at this point. And so he gets hired as the and by the way, I don't even think he's officially hired, or he's certainly not officially announced as of the last time I looked. But Twitter user, X user, UW commenter breaks it at Dino's Pub, which is a place that I'm only aware of because you used to go there a lot. I know that it's a place that it's a Seahawks management haunt. I know it's a sports writer haunt. I know that it's.
I think I can give a lot of perspective on.
Please,
there's one thing I'm an expert in. It's Dino's Pub. I lived.
This is my
the
thing that's most interesting to me. Yes.
Yeah, we can talk about Grubb as a whole in just a second. I think he does present an interesting hire, but the actual process of this news breaking. First of all, this UW commenter guy. It took me a while to realize that I know this guy. Like, actually,
I was wondering if you knew him.
Yeah, I didn't realize that at first. But many years ago, at one of the times I was at Dino's Pub, which I would go to most days, I ran into this dude, UW commenter, and he introduced himself to me. And I think prior to this moment in his life, the thing that he was most notable for, and you can actually go look this up, his name is Kyle Baldwin. And if you go search Kyle Baldwin and then like Seattle or basketball or something local, at one point it was rumored that, or thought that, he was the youngest high school basketball coach in the state of Washington. He got hired to be the head coach of Hazen High School in Renton when he was 23 years old. There's an article on it that another one of my friends wrote in the Tacoma News Tribune many years ago. So go check that out if you're interested in learning more about this guy. But I didn't. At one
point, he was 22.
Yeah, he was really young when he got hired, like very, very young. So anyway, Kyle breaks this story just because he happens to be sitting there. And when he broke the story, I didn't know it was Kyle. He's one of those guys that has changed his Twitter handle a bunch over the years, so it's hard to keep track. Sometimes you're like, somebody pops up in your feed and you just don't recognize their name, and you're like, how'd they get here? And then you kind of do some sleuthing and you find out that it was somebody you know who changed their handle a few times.
Yeah.
So he's one of those guys. Apparently he was sitting there on a date.
Wow.
Which I don't know if there's going to be a follow-up date. Who knows? We'd have to talk to him, I guess.
I think we got to get him on to talk about the date.
I know this guy spends a lot of time at Dino's because I've seen him there many, many times after the first time we met. And he just happened to be sitting there. And I was, I saw him tweet about it. And first thing I did was take it back to my group chat with people that really matter when it comes to this sort of thing. I have a group chat with these guys that actually cover these teams, and I was like, hey, you guys should probably see this. This seems like it might be credible enough. I follow this guy, so he can't be a total nut. I will cut the nut jobs out of my follows, right? So
sure, that's why Alex unfollowed me years ago. I can't even believe it.
So I was like, this seems like it might be pretty important. And so I kind of blew it up a little bit, and then the whole thing blew up, man. After I was able to get it out there, and I told these guys, the guys that I told raced down to Dino's to actually, they wanted to get a real statement from John Schneider and the team, because, I know, and I saw this kind of play out over the course of this night as this story is developing. When you're the fan that owns the story, quote unquote, and breaks it, of course you want to be credited, but there is like this journalistic process that has to occur. Your statement as a fan is kind of irrelevant until a journalist who follows a process and ethics and all of that gets a real statement from these guys. So when those guys were able to get there and actually confirm that Ryan Grubb, Mike McDonald, and Sean Schneider were having beers together, which was just wild, they were able to actually officially break that story. And it is really cool to just see how that sort of thing goes down. I also know, like, when you're just a fan and you kind of fall back asswards into something like that, it's a lot to deal with. There's like a gamut of emotions as you see your Twitter mentions fill up. I've been there before, like, and you really go through the entire spectrum of emotions. You're excited, obviously, first, happy because you're getting attention. Then you get upset because you see people calling you a liar or talking shit to you, right? And then you react. I watched this play out with Kyle on Twitter. He's reacting to the people that are calling him a liar. And it's like then you see him pull it back, gets back to excited and happy again, and then you just kind of go back and forth like that.
And he's also just like going to Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter and going, give me credit, give
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, there's no. Yeah, and again, I like having many years ago being in that position when I was writing and had my own website, and you feel like you're owed something when you quote unquote break a story. But what you realize is that if a journalist breaks a story, they don't get anything out of it. Like they don't get paid by the break. They're not going to get a raise at work. They'll get a little bit more notoriety, perhaps. But and a lot of, like, I will say, a lot of journalistic outlets have a policy of if they're going to source somebody, they have to source somebody with a real name attached to their account. Like, and I get a lot of people will never attach a real name to an account because they want to protect their own privacy. But I understand why that policy is in place. You can't be sourcing nutballs, when they break a story on the NFL. Like, that's just not going to work. It doesn't work for a newspaper or an outlet like that. So it was really cool to see, like, somebody I know be able to be involved in that whole process, break a really big, what ends up being a very, very big story, and then allowing the right people to get in place to kind of like corner the actual team personnel and make them admit that they're hiring this guy. So that was really cool.
So I will say, every time Grubb's name has come up, I've watched you grimace a little bit. I think that you even said last week that you were like, I would have been upset if Ryan Grubb was the coach of my favorite college football team. And I disagree. First off, I disagree. But I'm curious what has caused you to feel that way, because I see this guy who's like an offensive innovator. Obviously, the NFL sees it, going to be the offensive coordinator at Alabama. Like, to a degree, there's like, it's not. I think being the head coach at Washington is a significantly more prestigious gig than offensive coordinator at Alabama. But I think those are like two that are actually probably a Power 4 coaching job versus the offensive coordinator at like the biggest and most prestigious football school. They're not that far off. I think that this guy is like, accomplished in a way that I think made him attractive to me. And also the fact that he's an innovator makes me very excited that he's the Seahawks offensive coordinator, because they've been so, it's not just Pete Carroll and through the Darrell Bevell, Brian Schottenheimer, Shane Waldron era, but it goes back to like Jim Mora and Greg Knapp, and even like the Holmgren offenses, to be honest with you, were like, remember Holmgren was like barely or never ran shotgun. Like, he was so traditional West Coast. We're like 2 decades or more into these like kind of milquetoast, boring offenses. And, it's like a bad weather city, and they've predicated their, through under Holmgren, they had good running backs and a good running game. Obviously, Pete Carroll has prioritized the running game. I understand how that's beneficial in a bad weather city, but I feel like there's something you don't like about Ryan Grubb, and I want you on record. That's my new goal for 2024, is to get Alex on record with an opinion, because you have a politician's way of slipping around giving your actual opinion, and I'm trying to get you this year. Let's hammer you down. No more cowardice. Give us the real shit.
I mean, I think the Ryan Grubb as head coach of UW was like not super appealing to me, but as offensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks, that's much more appealing. I think, you're talking about a guy in Grubb who has no head coaching experience. He's only ever worked with one head coach. I think that's a really big thing. Is like when you have these coordinators that have bounced around and worked for a number of different head coaches, they see the different ways to do things, and they know the best way to approach a multitude of scenarios, which when you've only worked for one guy, even if that one guy is really good, you really don't have that diversity that you need to, adjust on the fly or adjust when things maybe go poorly. And, it's great that he's had success everywhere he's been, because DeBoer's had success everywhere he's been, and he's carried Grubb with him. But, as far as going from a coordinator who's only worked for one head coach to the head coach of a major college program, that's asking a lot, man. That is a really huge leap. And I'm not saying he couldn't do it or maybe wasn't ready for it, but it's obvious based on the direction they chose to go that they didn't feel he was ready for it. And everything that I heard was that while he's a really good coordinator, he might not have been ready to be a head coach of a program with that prestige at that moment. And I think, whether you're going from coordinator to coach or head coach at a small school to a bigger school, there's usually a path that you follow. And it would have been a pretty meteoric leap. He's already had a very meteoric rise in a short time. And I think it's tough to just expect that to keep going at that pace consistently. You really want him to kind of get some more experience under his belt. And I think, at this point, if he succeeds in Seattle with the offense here, he will be either an NFL or a college head football coach in short order. But I just didn't feel like the time was right. It's like UW basketball kind of has the same program. Not that people care or pay attention to UW basketball to the same degree, but for years people have been wanting Will Conroy, the head assistant coach of the basketball team, to
Have you been
take
reading
over.
my diary?
Yeah, take over for Mike Hopkins, and they want him to take over because he's a legacy. He played here, and he has no head coaching experience. He's never even coached at a small school. So to ask somebody to make that leap is very tough. It's just they just don't know what they're doing, and he's only been an assistant for like unsuccessful programs in Conroy's case. So it's very, very tough.
Yeah, I guess to me I think the thing is that like some continuity, probably holding on to some recruits and all that would have been good. But that's a short-term thing. I understand how that's not like you don't make a long-term decision based on the short-term needs of the program, especially in college football and I think we're going to have a lull in sports that we care about coming up. So we have time to go over these things like what's wrong with NIL and a whole bunch of Seahawks trade stuff that we can talk about. But I think that like, just because he doesn't have head coaching experience I think there's potential to be missing out on a great candidate. And I think an example is the Michigan made an internal hire. And I don't know, does Sharon Moore have head coaching experience that I'm not aware of?
Yeah, Sharon Moore. He has a little.
I know he
bit.
was head
basically
coach part of this year,
this entire season, pretty much.
Well, like half of it. Come on.
And Harbaugh got suspended a lot.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess that's fair. I don't know. Fortune favors the bold, and to me, if it's the right candidate, there shouldn't be this like there's already too much like undue pride and snobbery around college football to me, and especially like a program like Washington that is really, I mean, they're like in a moment right now where I think they have a chance to truly become one of the elite programs in the country. And I get that that's like, there's a lot of pressure to put that program into the hands of a guy, but I don't know. I'm just like, I like Jed Fish just fine. I think they're going to be fine. I think they'll probably win 8 games next year and be, if not a college football playoff contender. I think they're like, that's not out of sniffing range with the expansion of the playoff. I don't know. I like big swings. I've realized, and I think this might be why I like comedy, because the success rate doesn't have to be high. You could fail 80% of the time and just keep the 20% that works and move on with another new set, And I think the Seahawks have like a very high variance strategy right now, and I love it. And I'm also at an age, by the way, where I'm still like invigorated by change. This could change as I get older, obviously. And I think about my uncle who passed away last year, and him watching the Mariners be this like conservative team every single year, and him being frustrated by that. And I kind of hope to be that guy. to be like, make a big fucking move, take a risk, win a championship. I think that the chances of the Seahawks winning a championship are increased by these like high variance, very risky decisions they've made. I also think the chances of Mike McDonald being fired after 3 years have increased by hiring a no experience in the NFL offensive coordinator. But to me, if I don't need an 11-win team. I want to see a champion, and I think you get closer to becoming a champion by making bold decisions.
Yeah, I get the point you're making. I understand that, different fans are going to feel differently. I think the high risk, high reward strategy is obviously more enticing. It's why gambling exists.
Sure. Speaking of which,
love,
I'm a little bit ahead. I made a fair amount of money on the old Kansas City Chiefs, which is exciting.
See that perfect. Yes. No, I mean, high risk, high reward it's a good strategy to have if you have nothing to lose. I think the interesting thing about both the Seahawks and the Huskies, when it comes to Ryan Grubb, I think both teams are kind of on the precipice of being really good. Obviously, we know the Huskies are. They went to the championship this year. So for them, it's just trying to maintain the status quo. For the Seahawks, they've perennially been a playoff team, just missed out on the playoffs this season, and have, expectations. I wouldn't even say aspirations, expectations to get back there immediately. So, what Ryan Grubb brings to the table, and I think anytime you hire a coordinator, it's much easier to take those risks. If a coordinator goes bad, you just recycle that guy and go get somebody else next year. When it's the face of your program, whether it's the NFL or college, although I would say it probably matters more in college at this point, but your head coach, man, you have to get that hire right. Because if you don't get that hire right, you're setting yourself back many years. In the NFL, it's not as big of a deal if you whiff on your head coach now, because you can hire a new guy and get right back to the playoffs the next season because of the way that the NFL is designed and the parity in the NFL. In college football now, I mean, if you lose momentum for a second with the way NIL is going, you're really going to be down for a number of years, because you have to constantly be bringing in recruits, bringing in guys from the transfer portal and high school recruits, and just continuing that churn. There's so much churn in college now that I think the old way of doing things, where you just have this established head coach who's been there for 30 years or whatever it might be, it's going to be tough to work anymore unless they're successful, really successful. Coaches are going to have to find a new way of doing things. And I think Jed Fish does that pretty well. He's a pretty good salesman, and that's important. Going out and getting transfers, going out and getting guys out of high school, you got to be a good salesman now, and you have to have the finances to back you. And if you can prove that you can come from a place like Arizona, which maybe didn't have the same financial backing that a place like Washington has, although I'm sure Arizona fans might dispute that. But the reality is Washington does have a little bit more finance to back some of these sports programs. If you can prove that you can do it with a smaller budget, then of course you're going to move up. You're going to get hired by a bigger budget program. And so for college, it's like you cannot risk taking a chance on a guy like Ryan Grubb unless you know he's absolutely a great salesman and can bring a program together for years to come. Because if you think that's not the case, if you think any of those things are going to fall short, then you're potentially looking at a 5 or 10 year rebuild after things fail. It's like the same thing with Jimmy Lake. The Huskies got so lucky with Kalen DeBoer, because the way Jimmy Lake took that program, it seemed like it would be down for 5, 6, 7 years. But honestly, they got lucky by the start of the transfer portal era, because they could immediately go out and just bring people in, bring in reinforcements without having to develop high school guys over a number of years. And then when you complement that with Ryan Grubb's system, Kalen DeBoer's system, it paid dividends for them. But yeah, overall, I just feel like taking a risk at that level in college football when you just went to the championship, that's a huge, huge risk. And I get comparing it to Michigan because they have their in-house guy, but they already know that guy can lead because he's had enough experience coaching while Harbaugh's been on the sidelines. So a little bit different.
I want to talk briefly, because we got to move on to the other topics we have, because I have a little bit of a hard out. But I want to ask a couple brief questions about Ryan Grubb, and I want to ask you, I think, 3 questions. One is, so the Seahawks have Geno Smith under contract. I want to say, let's say they keep him all of next year. I think it's like $31.2 million cap hit. So $31.2 million is the important number for the Seahawks. they can save $20 million, $20+ million by cutting or trading him, cutting him before I want to say it's like Thursday or something like that. It's like really soon. So that's why I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. No, I think it's Friday, but, or by the end of Thursday. But two questions I have: a $20 million Geno Smith, $21 million Geno Smith, were he traded, that's what he would cost another team. That would be the salary they are on the hook for, I think, for the next 2 years. So like 2 years, $40-something million with Geno Smith. Does that guy have any trade value? Meaning, could you offer that guy for a 7th-round pick to Minnesota, Atlanta, Tennessee, one of these teams that's maybe looking for a short-term veteran option at quarterback? That's the first question.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think Geno's one of those guys that's going to be more valuable to the Seahawks than anybody else. There's just no getting around that. And also we know that the market for kind of like mid-tier quarterbacks in trade is pretty limited because they're just not that valuable. The cost benefit is not there. Like we've talked about this with Justin Fields. It's like if you're not going to be able to get anything better than like a 2nd-round pick for Justin Fields, then what is the market even? There is no trade market for these guys, really.
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with you. I think there might be some people who would disagree, but I wanted to see how you felt about that. So then my next question is to you. Do you think, because we talked about this last week, but I want to kind of put it, again, putting you on record, 2024, Alex, we're getting you on record. Drew Lock and Patrick Queen versus Geno Smith and nobody. I think in both cases, like we talked about, I want the Seahawks to draft a developmental quarterback, be that Michael Penix, be it in the 1st round, or they have 2 third-round picks, trading up into the 2nd round, whatever. I want to talk about a bunch as the time goes on in this offseason. We have a lot of time to talk about scenarios where the Seahawks may be able to acquire more draft capital. But right now, Drew Lock and Patrick Queen and a young developmental quarterback, or Geno Smith, no Patrick Queen. Which one is a better option?
Well, obviously the one that gets you a second player is a better option, I think. Because
that is a thing. Like we talk about the money, like it's not a morality or like Geno Smith isn't worth this amount of money, but there is this other option out there that's familiar with the team.
Yeah, I think they're going to have one of those guys for sure, especially if they draft a quarterback. I mean, there's no guarantee that they might not have both those guys back next year if they opt not to draft a quarterback. They might want to invest fully in other areas, which they certainly could do through the draft. I think
stop trying to wiggle out of this, Alex. No, stop trying to wiggle.
Best action, the more I think about it, is have one of those guys as your stopgap and draft a quarterback in the 2nd round. I don't think it's a 1st round.
There's a big difference in those stopgaps, right? Because the Geno Smith one costs you $33 million, and there is the rollover cap issue. Like that isn't just it's not just like you spend as much of your cap as you. One, I think they can win in 2024, is my opinion. Yeah. And I think that the team is better set up. And it's so then the question is does your opinion change if the second player is Jordan Brooks, Leonard Williams? Like how far down the list of free agents do you get before you go, well, Geno Smith is worth more than? I'm basically trying to gauge what your opinion is on the gap between Drew Lock and Geno Smith and quantify it with a player that they could acquire.
Yeah, I don't think it's that much, but I think the gap between them is small. The issue you have is that if you cut Geno Smith, let's say you cut Geno, you're probably not going to trade him, but let's say you cut him, all of a sudden Drew Lock has a lot of leverage. And the cost for Drew Lock probably goes up. I know Drew Lock is not a hot commodity that people are going to line up to sign, but there are still teams out there that would pay him a lot to be a backup or even potentially vie for a starting.
So I said last week, 2 years, $15 million. Do you stand by that as he would sign that deal?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know what Drew Lock is looking for, what's important to him.
This slimy politician, Alex. Oh my God.
I mean, you hear these stories about guys who come to Seattle and like they actually want to stay here. Like this is where they want to play. And maybe that's the case with him, or maybe he has somebody somewhere else in mind, or maybe he has an agent that's going to drive the conversation and say, I'm not letting you sign anywhere unless it's for the most money. We don't know that. But I do think if you're talking about saving some money by cutting Geno Smith and then having Drew Lock be the guy that is your de facto starter, unless you feel comfortable drafting a guy and starting him on day one,
Sure.
then you have many different options that you can play with right now. But it seems like if that domino falls where you cut Geno Smith, well, that takes a number of options off the table right away, because now you're either committing to a backup type quarterback or another version, a cheaper version of Geno Smith if you were to go out and sign somebody. But because Drew Lock's a free agent, and because you just don't know what he's going to I mean, I'm sure they have some idea of what he's looking for money wise, but
Sure.
that number can certainly change based on changing circumstances. So if you cut Geno Smith and you haven't secured something in place with Drew Lock, all of a sudden your quarterback situation gets very murky. I know we talked a little bit about this last week too. If you're Mike McDonald, I mean, you have to try and win right away. I mean, every coach wants to win right away, but to think that you have to kind of carry this momentum of what Seattle has been under Pete Carroll, which has been a destination for free agent football players when it was not previously. Like, even for as great as Holmgren was, they weren't bringing in the big name free agents. They just weren't. Like, they were bringing in some guys that would help out and fill some gaps, but most of what they had was homegrown talent. And, in the Pete Carroll era, everybody wanted to come to Seattle. And you have to continue that momentum. If you lose that momentum in your first couple of years on the job, if you're Mike McDonald, all of a sudden you are fighting a big uphill battle, and it might be tough to get back. So you have to kind of try to win right away. And you got to determine, it's like, even if you take a big swing on one of these rookie quarterbacks, having somebody in place that you can trust is very important. I think they're going to trust Geno Smith much more than Drew Lock. But the cost benefit, I mean, these are things that you have to weigh.
They've also both mentioned, Schneider and McDonald have mentioned Drew Lock specifically, even though he's not under contract next year. So I'm trying to quickly pull up, and I'm not going to get to it before we need to move on, but I think 2 years 15 million is actually pretty aggressive for Drew Lock. I don't think he's going to get 2 years $15 million from anybody, including the Seahawks.
I think just like Geno, Drew Lock is a guy who's worth more to the Seahawks than any other organization in football. They seem to value him, and he hasn't shown enough for other teams to come calling for him the way that they would with like a Matt Flynn back in the day, for example. That's just not going to happen for him anytime soon. So for him, it's like, hey, even if they're telling you you're our stopgap for this year, that's a pretty good audition to potentially be a starter somewhere else for years to come. So, I'm sure they'll figure it out, but my hope would be that they still draft a guy at quarterback, because you can sit him for a year. You can sit him. There's always this rush to start your rookie quarterbacks right away. And it's like, sometimes it goes well, like CJ Stroud. Sometimes it goes bad, like Bryce Young. But if you sit them for a year or two, what you might end up having is like a Patrick Mahomes situation, like when he sat behind Alex Smith. So you have that luxury to have somebody else be the starter and still draft and develop a guy this year. That seems like the most prudent route. We know that the Seahawks very rarely do what the fans want, though.
Well, I don't know. I mean, they have a good record of it right now. I think that's kind of like,
last couple of years have been good. Yeah.
There's some hope that what they're doing, what the fans have wanted, is what John Schneider has wanted also, and Pete Carroll has been the guy that's been stopping it. And I will say, I'm going to give you two examples. Spottrack's market value, which love or hate that. The market value for Gardner Minshew, who I would think is more valuable than Drew Lock, is a $5.3 million annual salary. Jameis Winston, who I would think is kind of in a similar category to Drew Lock, is like $2.7 million, I think it was. So yeah, I think 2 years, $15 million is aggressive, and I'm intentionally being aggressive because I don't think he's going to make more than that. I don't think Drew Lock is going to make more than that. And whoever the guy is, the marginal guy you add on defense, but a $15 million defensive player. I guess it doesn't have to be a defensive player, but I think that's where we think they need to make additions, where we think Mike McDonald will want to make additions. If it's Jordan Brooks, Patrick Queen, Leonard Williams, one of those three guys are like the most obvious. Maybe it's someone we're not talking about. To me, it seems very obvious that Geno Smith is worth less than the sum of Drew Lock plus that defensive player. So if you can do that, to me, it makes a lot of sense. And I think either scenario, draft a quarterback relatively high, take a lottery ticket and see what you got. In fact, I'm in favor of them drafting a guy in the first round that they don't plan on starting in year one, even though I think they can win now, because they have the opportunity to clear up enough cap space, I think, to fill some holes on the roster. And I think they can take a pretty big risk on that personally. should we move on now? Because we're not like out of time, but we're closer and closer to being out of time.
Let's talk about the Super Bowl.
Let's do it.
Yes, it was. I was just there for Usher. Did not disappoint.
I will say, what an interesting thing about Usher's performance is it's the first time in years I've been certain someone wasn't lip syncing. But the reason I was certain he wasn't lip syncing is because at the beginning, the singing and dancing combination was not going well.
Yeah, I mean, respect to Usher. He is out to be a performer. I mean, you don't usually see a guy dancing that hard while also singing because it's very taxing.
Yes, and he didn't hide the tax. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I appreciate that he was as sweaty as he was because as somebody who sweats a lot myself, thank you, Usher. Thank you for shining a spotlight on our pain.
I also thought it was interesting that the world, like maybe it's the world of white people, just rediscovered Alicia Keys. Like Alicia Keys. By the way, Alicia Keys looks exactly the same as she did. Like the tremendous looking lady, but also like easily I thought the most talented person on that stage, and a person who you're like, thank you for not having her lip sync because she sounded incredible. And
also Ludacris.
Ludacris was great. Ludacris was actually Ludacris was great. Yeah, Lil Jon was great. I do think I'm a little bit I'm over the like strip club version of songs where it's like we're gonna cut two out of the 4 verses of this song.
Yeah, you kind of have to do that. Every Super Bowl halftime performance is like that. It's like
I know, and I hate it. That's what I'm saying.
It's the Instagram Reels version of music. It's just like snippet here, snippet there. You got to piece it all together. I was very surprised. I don't know if you were surprised by this as well. Friend
of the podcast, Frank Castro. The Seahawks just officially announced Grubb. Okay. Also, by the way, 2 weeks from now, Tony Daniel headlining on the 24th of February at Bickerson's Brewhouse, and then I rescheduled my Bickerson's Brewhouse date to April 6th in Ballard because my wife was like ready to throw me off of a roof if I did as much comedy as I have scheduled. So, especially days away from home. Anyway.
Yeah, anyway, I was just going to say, you might have been surprised by this too. Little John's in pretty good shape, right? Like Little John was kind of ripped, and it's surprising because in the 2000s, in the Little John era, the early 2000s, all you ever saw him in was like big baggy clothes, so you never really got an idea of like if Little John was or was not in shape. But he's going sleeveless at the Super Bowl halftime show, and he's got some guns on him. I mean, I know he's only like 5'3", but he looks like he could at least take you down in a wrestling match or something.
I've always thought of Little John. I think it's the same as I feel about Cat Williams, which is they kind of remind me of my Uncle Rick, where they're like wiry in a way. My Uncle Rick was alcoholic, drank 24 Miller High Lifes a day, but maintained 140 pounds. And then we'd go camping with him, and this guy's just like carrying driftwood logs to make a fire or whatever. And he's just like it's all just sinewy fucking tendon strength or something. Like there's no muscle on this man, but he's somehow not like huge muscles, and he manages to be. And I kind of view that like that's what Cat Williams and Lil Jon are built like, is just these like, yeah.
No, I would be curious to hear how Cat Williams and Lil Jon feel being compared to one another, because
yeah, fair.
I can't imagine Lil Jon would be thrilled about that. But I get what you're saying. I get the type of person. I don't like that type of person.
By the way, if they don't want to be compared to each other, those two specific guys quit being these like flamboyant, like wildly dressing. I don't think they're that different. Are they both from Atlanta too? Or no? I know that Cat's not from Atlanta actually, but yeah. Anyway,
let's talk about the game itself. The game was very boring for like 3.5 quarters.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it wasn't. Because I was sitting there, we were watching with some friends, and we just were like, we couldn't get over how boring the game was. It was just punts and defensive stops. And like, that's not, I know it's a close game, but it's like, I'm a big baseball fan, as are you. When people are like, I love a 1-0 baseball game, I'm like, I don't really, and I was even a pitcher growing up, and it's boring. It's just boring.
I don't mind a 1-0 baseball game. I will say it was somewhat boring. But I don't know. I guess like it always felt like it was building to the end that I think we got the end that it was building to the whole time.
Yeah.
I guess it's like watching a movie from the 80s where we're just not used to this pace anymore. You know what I mean? We're used to a higher scoring pace, but I was I enjoyed it all the way through, and one thing that I found interesting, and so I learned about the fourth quarter or the overtime rules with everybody else
Oh,
because I
everybody
didn't.
did. Everybody
But
did. I
but
mean,
what
that
I found
was
interesting, there's been a lot of scrutiny over San Francisco not giving Kansas City the ball, taking the ball first. And first off, San Francisco players didn't know the rules. The coaching staff, I think, did. I even heard an interview with Steve Young this morning, and they were like, "What do you think they should have done?" And his answer made it obvious that even after having watched the game, Steve Young doesn't actually understand the rules because he's like, "I would have taken the ball because I don't want Patrick Mahomes to get a chance to have the ball in his hands." And I'm like, "You do not understand what the rules are
no
now."
one understands the rules. The broadcast didn't understand them.
Yeah,
Um, Bill Vinovich, the extent to which he explained the rules was we're playing a whole new game, which that can mean any number of things. I mean, it's such a vague, a vague description. It's like, okay, we didn't realize you're not really playing a whole new game. I get it.
yeah,
The thing that was very confusing is that, when the Chiefs get down to the goal line with 10 seconds left or whatever, everyone's screaming at them to take a timeout because you figure in 10 seconds that this overtime period is over and one of two things happens. Either the game is tied and you kind of just start overtime all over again, like it's college football, right? Or the game just ends because you
right.
didn't tie the game. And what it actually came to be is that they would have got to finish their possession regardless. They would have flipped fields like it was the end of the first quarter and the start of the second, and they would have continued going on, which made me think that the simplest breakdown of the overtime rules was the game doesn't end until the Chiefs win. It's kind of what it seemed like to me.
Yeah, I think that the new game thing, there's a lot of the field flipping carrying that statement. That's because I had someone in a group chat that I'm in full of data guys that was like, well, if it's just a new game, why do they even have a game clock at this point? And it was like, well, the reason is because at the end of that quarter they flipped the field, and in yesterday's game that wouldn't have made a big difference, but in a game where there's like a ton of wind outdoors, there's elements involved that could make a huge difference in
Yeah,
how the game is played.
it was just very confusing, and the NFL did a really bad job of explaining it to people. And on
Sure.
top of that, this was a rule that was designed for the postseason. So these weren't even the rules they were operating under during the regular season, which to some degree I understand. You can have ties in the regular season, that's fine. Obviously, you can't in the postseason, so you have to amend things a little bit. But this was just so different than anything that the NFL has ever done rules wise. And because it's the first time we're all seeing it, it just didn't make much sense to anybody. And
Yeah.
then the fact that that wasn't communicated to the people who are responsible for communicating it to the fans made it even worse. So now
Yeah.
there's always going to be this confusion. If you're a 49er fan, you probably feel like you were robbed of something because you weren't given the rules of the game in a way that made sense. And then to watch your team lose because of that,
Well, but
it feels
I don't know what
unfortunate, right?
I don't think that the 49ers would have done anything differently. To me, this is like it's a lucky. I'm not saying you're wrong, but it is lucky that the this was not a situation where I think the rules affected the outcome. I understand how they could have, but I don't think they did. I think they still kick a field goal. Maybe they're a little more aggressive, but nobody thought it was sudden death overtime. Obviously, you
Yeah.
still even in the old rules, you're making the choice to give Kansas City the ball back. And even in the old rules, if Kansas City kicks a field goal, you play another sudden death possession. So I don't think that San Francisco acted in a way that was obvious that they would have done something different if they understood the rules differently. It seemed like the coaches understood the rules. I'm probably on the side of let Kansas City have the ball. Let's gather as much information as we can before we make the decision.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's like the margin's probably pretty small in a circumstance where both teams get possession. And in fact, it might be that win probability is better because once it becomes sudden death, you have the first possession. If it becomes sudden death,
Yeah. It's the strategy can be debated and will be debated ad
sure,
nauseum because now we're introduced to this whole new set of rules that completely blows up the old strategy and the old way of doing things. And lucky for NFL fans, they have the entire offseason to think about it. And I guess all of next regular season because we won't see those rules introduced until next postseason once again. But just the fact that you have this different set of rules for the postseason and the way of doing things changes when you get to a different time of year that makes it very difficult to
But it's always been
operate.
that way because they never would have allowed a postseason game to end in a tie before anyway. Like
Yeah, but
I
back in
think,
the day, they had the sudden death, like the golden goal, where it was whoever scores first wins. I mean, that was at least easy to understand. It was
but now it's just one
unfair.
possession each plus sudden death. That's like the it's so they explained it in a way that was not concise. I agree
Yes.
with that. I'm
Well,
somewhat on.
the timing mechanism though is different too. I mean, sorry to cut you off, but the timing mechanism is much different because now it's like you could theoretically play for 60 minutes if your possessions took long enough, right? You could play
But you could have
15,
done that
15,
before
15.
too.
No, because before in the regular season, it's a timed 10 or 15 minutes, whatever they're doing. I can't remember off the top of my
Oh, but
head.
yeah, in the regular season, but previous to this, in the postseason, they still it wouldn't have been. I actually don't know for sure. Would they have had the clock roll over, or would it have been
I
the
don't
end
know.
of?
I think it would have
So,
been timed period and
but
then
either
new
way,
period.
there
Yeah.
in the previous version, you would have flipped fields, you would have had another coin toss maybe. But it's like it's not that different. It's in fact like I think a pretty significant enhancement for a moment like that. You don't want that game being decided by a field goal, and the best quarterback in the NFL right now doesn't get a possession. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really feel like, and I've been an advocate of this for years. I know this is like a divisive topic, but I think they should just adopt the college overtime rules. And they can modify it. I mean, I know
I don't
college
like
you
where they
start.
start on like the 40
Yeah,
yard
yeah.
line or
I,
whatever.
I think college starts at like the 25. It's already like a gimme field goal. Like if you were to just in college, if you just kick the field goal immediately, most kickers are going to convert it. So let's say you start at the 50-yard line, right? Like each team gets to start at the 50-yard line. If you both convert and tie the game up, then we just flip the field and do it all over again, right? I think that way of doing things, it accomplishes a lot. If you're worried about player safety, they're not out there running around for a bunch of extra time. It's just possession by possession, basically. So it's going to save you some time there. And then also, just like every snap in that scenario is critical. Whereas when you
Yeah.
have the entire length of the field and kind of an undefined amount of time in which to score, it doesn't make every snap as critical. All you're worried about is whether or not you turn the ball over in that situation.
Yeah.
So I think they have to. This requires some work still. There's still some tweaking that has to happen to get it right. I don't know if they'll get there anytime soon.
I don't
It
mind
was
it as is. They
unfortunate that
just need
happened on
people to
video.
understand it. I think that's the biggest
Yeah.
deal. Is I think if people understood it better, we wouldn't hate it. I'm also, by the way, I'm losing ground on a crying baby, so we are running out of. We are by the and
Yeah,
I also the most kid talk we've had. And fuck you, Matt Holt. Deal with it. I'm going to talk about these goddamn kids if they're crying in my ear right now. I guess I'll get to the part about Patrick Mahomes and Brock Purdy. I don't think Brock Purdy's a game manager. It's like this is the new like slur for Brock Purdy. I think he's a very good quarterback. I think what he does very well is what everyone's saying. He processes, gets rid of the ball quickly, not because he has some lightning fast release, but because he processes the defense very quickly, makes a decision very quickly. There's been a bunch of discussion about Patrick Mahomes, whether or not he is the GOAT, when he will become the GOAT, the GOAT. He's not the GOAT. It's obviously Tom Brady still. There's like not even really a discussion. My question for you is it completely obvious to you that he's number two? And if not, how close is he? And who is number two?
Yeah. It is cool for the NFL that they can have this Brady Mahomes discussion for years to come.
Yeah.
It's very much like Jordan and LeBron, honestly. Like
Sure.
much like Brady, Jordan had all the rings, all the cachet, all the hardware, and at one point in time was the most, one of the most recognizable athletes in the world, right?
Yeah.
You can say that about both Tom Brady and Michael Jordan. The thing about LeBron and Patrick Mahomes, it's very similar. I think in each case that LeBron is the superior athlete to Michael Jordan. Patrick Mahomes is the superior athlete to Tom Brady. He's just a better, like you watch him throw the ball, he's got better arm strength, better decision making. He's just quicker at the quarterback position. But that's not to say that he'll ever get to 7 championships the way Tom Brady did. So until you can do that sort of thing, same thing with LeBron, until you can eclipse your predecessor's championship capability, no one's going to give you the benefit of the doubt.
I think it would be an argument if he doesn't get to 7 for sure. There would be like a continued argument.
Yeah.
I'll argue that LeBron is better than Jordan personally, but I get that
LeBron.
I get that there's an argument though. Like I don't think it's like so cut and dry where I think like it's so obvious that Brady leads the world in passing for his career. the most touchdowns ever, the most postseason everything. Like it's like by so far and away Tom Brady that is like not even a discussion I think worth having. But is Montana winning 4 versus Mahomes winning 3 by age 28? Is Montana presently ahead of him? Is it just on championships when you're talking about the second place guy, or do you put guys into that discussion like Dan Marino, like Peyton Manning, like John Elway, who had great careers, Drew Brees, maybe, who only won 1, but how much do you then weigh the third championship versus some of those guys? 2 championships, Steve Young, another one.
Yeah,
but
it's weird with quarterbacks because quarterbacks are always recognizable. All those guys you just mentioned, they still show up in ads today, even though a lot of them have been retired for years. And obviously, when you're talking about like basketball and Jordan and LeBron, it's tougher to stand out in basketball because you're a little bit more positionless, right? There's not one position in the game of basketball that dominates the space the way quarterback dominates the football field. Right. So the unique thing about Mahomes, I think, is just the overall popularity that you see among him and Brady compared to some of those other guys that you mentioned. I think that's kind of what separates these guys. And then when you think about just on-field performance, for all the talk about how great Mahomes' arm talent is and the fact that he's mobile, a little bit more mobile than Brady ever was, certainly, and a pretty good runner when he has to be, the way that they kind of play the game and throw the ball around is similar to me because even if you just watched yesterday's game and that was the only time you saw the Chiefs play this year, there is a lot of just short passes, taking what's given to you and really just executing in kind of that middle space in order to set up the bigger plays. I think when you think of like a big arm quarterback, you just assume, I think this CJ Stroud would be a good example of this year. You see the highlight packages and it's just like deep ball, deep ball, deep ball, deep ball, or like when Russ was at his best, just throwing deep balls for dimes all the time. But the really good quarterbacks, the Bradys and the Mahomes, a lot of what they're doing is not on the highlight reel. It's just dumping it off to a tight end or dumping it off to a running back, getting 5 or 10 yards out of that and like moving the chains consistently. And then when they have to unleash the big throw, they're able to do that too. They just don't have to do it on every single play the way a guy like Russell Wilson had to. I mean, Russ, it seemed like he was always going for the home run. The really good quarterbacks don't have to do that.
Yeah, I think people thought that he wasn't allowed to be a rhythm passer. And I think part of the deal was maybe he wasn't really able to be a rhythm passer. And honestly, like it's funny that it's like we've kind of admitted later in his career that his height actually has had an impact on his long-term ability to be a quality quarterback.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's with Russ or even with Breeze, there's an element of that. And I think what Mahomes does so well is he sees the space in front of him. Like when he turns to do his check down dump off, it's not like he's turning, looking at the check down guy and then throwing the ball, hesitating that half second. A lot of quarterbacks do that. When he turns to that check down guy, he's already releasing the ball. He knows that guy's there. He knows that guy's there the whole time. He knows the free 5 yards are there for him at any point in time, but he's able to go and read through that entire progression across the field and know where he wants to go. I mean, this dude won this year with no receivers, basically.
Yeah.
Marquez Valdez-Scantling can like 50% of the time catch a ball if it's dropped into his hands and barely ever gets open. And yet they still won with guys like that. The game-winning touchdown yesterday is to Mecole Hardman, who's a retread. He was dropped by the Chiefs, dropped by the Jets, and back with the Chiefs now. And it's like they're winning with nobodies. That's kind of what Brady always did. Brady was notorious for that. And then things really kicked into gear when they went out and got him Randy Moss. So if they get one big receiver that's, not Travis Kelce in Kansas City, who knows if the sky's the limit for Mahomes, but he could certainly – there's more there than we've seen already, and he's already won 3 championships.
It is kind of interesting, the parallels of first off, Andy Reid's legacy is interesting. He was the guy for years who just couldn't win one. And now by the way, Kyle Shanahan is that guy, but Andy Reid was that guy for so long, and now luckily, I mean, it's good because I like Andy Reid, but he's going to be considered one of the greatest coaches of all time, which he probably deserved anyway. But now it's going to be less of a debate because he has won the big one 3 times. I think similarly to the Patriots, it's interesting that the passing attack is kind of built around an elite tight end. and then you're able to kind of fit these other guys around him. And did Randy Moss, did he win a championship with New England? I know that they had the 18-1 season.
I don't remember. I mean, I feel like just law of averages, he probably did, but I can't remember the years. Like they were winning most of the time, so
I know.
probably, but I don't know. No, I do see what you're saying though. I think the interesting thing about Andy Reid is that he's like the disciple of the Mike Holmgren coaching tree, the Bill Walsh coaching tree.
Yeah.
The original West Coast offense that has been kicking around for 30 to 40 years now.
I just go, hold on. I gotta explain to people who watch the video of this. I had an ad start so loud because I'm trying to pull up if Randy. Oh my god! I just about shit my pants on this podcast. I don't know if you saw
I
me.
feel like that would add to it. I mean, especially if you're just listening on audio.
Oh my god!
But the offense that Andy Reid runs it's not particularly innovative for the modern day world, right? Like he's been running the same offense for forever, and it continues to work. I mean,
he's modified it quite a bit, though. I mean, there's a lot more motion than like the traditional West Coast offense.
Sure.
And also, by the way, Randy Moss, no championships, which is surprising. He played 3 years in New England, which must be he played in the 3 years they didn't win a championship, the only 3-year stretch probably.
So he was the problem.
Yeah,
but no, I hear what you're saying, but I think the elements of the West Coast where you're still like using kind of the short passes to effectively replace the running game, or just keep the chains moving. There's still a ton of that in their offense. Whereas you watch a guy like you watch Mike McDaniel in Miami, or one of those guys, the newer guys that get labeled as like the big innovators with offense, and they don't have a lot of those. They have some of those West Coast elements, but a lot more home run type passes or deep balls. Even like a guy like Ryan Grubb, having watched so much of his tenure at Washington, it's a lot of deep routes still.
Well, what I would say about McDaniel, and what I think is going to be true of Grubb also, is we also saw a lot of like short screens to receivers, and we did see a fair amount of like, back shoulder, relatively short throws from Penix. So it's like short and long, and not a lot of like living at the 15 to 25 yard pass, where like I think the pre-West Coast offense was. So it's like, it's kind of like the blend of West Coast principles and the like kind of air raid stuff that goes way down, like the spread stuff that sends guys way downfield. And it's good on Andy Reid for being able to adapt to that. You don't hear a lot about 60-year-old, mid 60s, nearly 70-year-old coaches. I don't know how old he actually is. He could be 31.
I mean, Belichick and Pete Carroll were kind of like carrying that torch for a long time, and now Andy Reid is kind of the grandfather of the NFL in a way.
Yeah, true. But I think like good on him for being able to adapt, because you don't hear about that from guys with his legacy at his age very often. And so I do think that's like that. It is impressive because I mean it's like this is going to be a tough example for some of our audience, but my dad is a Republican. He's a conservative. And finding out that he didn't vote for Trump was like, oh shit, he actually is like consuming information still. He's not just voting on straight up loyalty, right? You know what I mean?
No, I think that's a good analogy. I think with Belichick and Pete Carroll, they both refused to adapt at the end, and it's cost them their jobs. It took a long time because they had built up so much cachet with the teams that they were coaching, but ultimately their failure to adapt is what spelled their demise. And for a guy like Andy Reid to actually be able to adapt to a new way of doing things, which, granted, I don't think he's had to adapt too much because he's got the greatest quarterback on the planet right now. That helps a lot. That's going to fix a lot of the problems that you might have with innovation or a new playbook or personnel or whatever. Same thing with Belichick in that, like when Brady was there, clearly once Brady left, it kind of exposed all the flaws that Belichick's system had. But when Brady was there, he masked a lot of those flaws. And I think that's a reality of what a good quarterback can do, and really kind of speaks to just the pairing you have when you have a good coach and a good quarterback.
I think that the last topic we have on the Super Bowl is Taylor Swift. And one, I think this is perfectly fitting that we're barely going to talk about her because we got to go to your final topic. But
we don't have to go to my final. My final topic can be done at any point in time.
I mean, it's fair, but I think like one thing I will say about Taylor Swift, I will take the stance on Taylor Swift, which is one, I do not care if they show her or don't show her. They don't. I did not find it distracting at all. I also think like it's just like if a mega star, if Beyonce was dating one of the players on the team, if Michael Jackson had been dating, well, if he'd been dating one of the players on the team, I think we'd have seen him a lot because it was a different time. And but I mean, like if somebody who was a mega star, if Celine Dion or Selena or somebody, somebody who was just like a global
Selena's
sensation.
An interesting choice, yeah.
Selena is that what you said?
Yeah, it's an interesting deep cut. Okay.
Yeah, fine. I mean, maybe if she was at a soccer game, it would have been a little more. There might have been a little more airtime, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's like I don't understand the thing about Taylor Swift in particular because she's such a. Oh yeah, here's our pal Bob Springer. Just got here. Not sure if you talked about them yet, but damn good hat game today, fellas. Yeah, that's we talked about them at the very beginning. Alex has on like a metallic, old school Mariners Trident logo in. It's like a mix of modern and vintage, and then I love this old Seahawks stuff, and I hope that it sticks around. But yeah, Taylor Swift, I don't give a shit. Like, fine, keep showing her, don't show her, it doesn't matter to me. I'm unoffended by her. I don't think she's a psyop. I don't think that I don't think that she was somehow controlling the outcome of the game or anything like that.
I mean, the NFL did itself no favors with the script because I shouted the script about a dozen times during the game yesterday. Or 2 days ago, anytime something went right for the Chiefs, it did feel like it was scripted. I know it's probably not, but it certainly felt that way. It was full WWE. It's like you guys had this storyline that you carried all throughout the season, and then in the end it pays off. I mean, it's like straight out of a movie.
It's funny. What I think is funny is that you do believe the NFL is scripted and also that we landed on the moon, and I don't believe the NFL is scripted and I don't think we landed on the moon. So that's where we differ. And I don't know. I think both of us fall on some side of the psyop fence in this case, and whatever.
Yeah, it's
people are complex.
I do feel like at this point it's gotten so meta that people are making up an invisible they as far as they are mad at Taylor Swift. At times where it's like I don't think anyone's that upset. I get that there are some loud voices on social media or whatever, but those guys they're always going to be that. That's troll for everything. So, all she does is really kind of replace some of the crowd shots instead of looking at some sad fan after a play or some happy fan after a play who's just like sipping on their beer and being a fat slob. You get to look at Taylor Swift instead. Isn't that better? I feel like that's better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, every time they do a shot of her in her suite, there's always somebody new. Every game, you're like, is that Blake Lively? Is that Ice Spice? How do they know each other?
Ice Spice is a tough one for me because it's like you have all of these classic artists on, and you're like, how do they even? Because how old is Ice Spice? Yeah. Ice Spice has to be pretty young.
Yeah,
and I gotta say about Ice Spice, it's a jarring look.
I think we just lost Casey, but I believe he was going to go off about Ice Spice's look, which is fine. That's it might not be everybody's taste, and that's okay. Very popular, however, and it is fascinating to see what happens to these celebrities when they get together. Like, I want to know how they all became friends. Like, what's the story there? How did they get to know each other? Oh, hey. You're back. I was just delivering.
I was ranting still, and I felt it's
okay. It was probably for the best.
Where did I leave off on? At?
Oh, Ice Spice. But what I was saying is, I just want to know the backstory of how they all got to know each other because I find that stuff fascinating. It's like they really don't. Their musical styles are completely different. Ordinarily you wouldn't think of them as being in the same circles. Even just finding out that Taylor Swift and Blake Lively were like best friends, which I had no idea about. That's fascinating to me. Like, I want to know how all these people come together.
Yeah, I'm. The Ice Spice thing. What I was saying, I was saying that she has a jarring look, which people may hate or love. It's just unlikely to me that this lady who's 10 years younger than she seems like an old lady trying to cling to her youth. That's the only moment I've felt that. And she's 34. She's not an old lady. She's very young and spry. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, pitchers and catchers reporting. We can make that our
Closing
final
topic. It's a
topic.
great time of year. It's a great time of year. We get to see gratuitous shots of Arizona and Florida over the next
Sure.
few weeks. We get to look at the sun, which we don't often get to do here, so that'll be fun. And more importantly than the pitchers and catchers reporting, which is, if you're a baseball fan, is always a great time of year. A story, I wouldn't even call it a story, but some photos have surfaced in the last 24 hours or so of new MLB jerseys and how terrible they are.
Sure.
And it is, over the years, MLB for a number of years had Majestic, the brand Majestic, made their uniforms. And to the best of my knowledge, Majestic is basically known for nothing else besides making MLB jerseys. I know that they consider themselves an apparel company, but who wears Majestic brand stuff? So they were all about the jerseys. They fully immersed the jersey game. And then MLB turned things over to Nike. Nike's more or less, they stuck with the status quo. They were fine. Now they've turned things over to Fanatics. And Fanatics, if you're not familiar with Fanatics and you're a sports fan, they are the great monopoly we should be most scared of in the world.
Sure.
Fanatics makes some real cheap, low quality garbage apparel. And now they are taking that game to Major League Baseball. They already have taken it to hockey. So, they do have some rights with hockey. And if you've ever purchased a Kraken jersey, if you're from around Seattle, or any hockey jersey, there are two brands that make hockey jerseys. There's Adidas, which actually ends after this year, and there's Fanatics. And the difference between the two jerseys is vast. They look the same, they feel and wear completely different, because Fanatics, I don't know where they outsource their production to and the materials that they use, but all of their shirts feel like tissue paper. And now they're spreading that to professional jerseys, apparently.
Is this? Do you see? Has this popped up on your screen? Do you see my window here?
It has. This is. There's been a few teams. The Mariners, I think, were one of the first ones to surface, and I think they probably surfaced because they made a big deal out of fixing the lettering on the backs of jerseys. The old Mariner lettering on the backs of these jerseys was kind of a punchline. It was all over the place.
Sure.
So their way of fixing that was by shrinking the font down to a nice 12 points and just printing it right off a sheet of paper instead of doing anything fun with it.
You got to bring a set of binoculars to the game if you want to read anybody's. So what's your outlook on this season? I guess is the real question, because.
Oh, you want to talk about the Mariners as a whole? Oh, it's
yeah,
bad.
and we can go very brief.
Negative, very negative. I think
Gotcha.
Even the moves that they made, I think, can certainly help them. I don't feel like they've gotten much better or much worse than what they were last year, and they were
Right.
close. They were close to getting in last year, but they haven't. The problem with the Mariners, as we know, is they never take the next step. They just shuffle some things around, and they're basically the same team they were the year before, right? I mean, that's kind of what they do, because they
The
don't
Mariners
want to spend
act the way that you want the Huskies and the Seahawks to act, which is as these conservative, as though they have some.
That's how I want those teams to act. That's not how I want them to act.
Now you desperately you wanted the ghost of Jim Lambright to come back and coach the Huskies. That's how traditional you are.
To take. I think here's the thing in football in general, whether it's college or NFL. The risk reward scenario is so much different than it is in baseball. In baseball, taking the big risk can pay off because you don't have a salary cap. Whereas taking big risks in football with a salary cap, or in college with NIL and the way that it all works and transfer portal and all that, taking those big risks can really set you back for a long time. But taking the big risks in baseball, it's like money can solve everything.
Joke, Alex. It was a joke. Relax.
I take it very seriously. Very seriously. The Mariners are like my diet plan. The Mariners are, we're going to go out. We're just going to do the same thing.
You don't take it very seriously.
We're not going to take the next step. I would like to lose all the weight that I desire, but I don't want to make the life changes to actually do that. Right. So I'll do the bare minimum to make sure I just stay the same. So I just don't get bigger. I'll just stay the same. That's what the Mariners do every single year. Every single year. They just don't. They don't want to gain any more weight. They don't want to lose any weight. They're not serious. They're not a serious team.
Yeah.
And yet I'm wearing all their apparel.
Yes, you're decked out in expensive special edition apparel in both cases. So.
I love the Mariners and I hate them. I mean, they have driven me crazy. They'll always be my first sports love, and yet they don't reciprocate. They're just not reciprocating for me.
It's going to be a frustrating season, and then also it's like in the realm of real possible outcomes for the Mariners is like a 95 win season where they make the playoffs. Like it's interesting. So yeah, I'm not the pitchers and catchers reporting. It's funny because I guess in my life I've just replaced all the preseason baseball stuff with I'm very excited about the draft coming up, so we could talk about both preseason baseball and the draft a lot as the year goes on. I should tend to this child. I heard her crying a little while ago. We won in the short term. We won the short-term battle with this child, but I will lose the war if I don't go fight right now. So
we covered all our big topics for today, and we saved some. We have some in the chamber for next week, although stuff will develop. So
yes, of course.
And
once again, tweet at Alex if you want to hear this podcast every single day of the week, or at least Monday through Thursday, or at least Tuesday, Thursday, something like this. I'm trying to squeeze another episode a week out of this guy. Shorter episodes more often. Let him know. Let us know. If you feel the opposite, just, fuck off. Don't tell us. Casey McLean Comedy, CaseyMcLeanComedy.com for any stand-up dates. I'll be at Tacoma Comedy Club on Wednesday. And, God, I'm all over the place. And including, most importantly, March 15th, 16th, recording a special at the new club, and April 6th with my pal Frank Castro, and then monthly at Bickerson's Brewhouse. And if you're up in that area, by the way, they make some great beer. Go check out Bickerson's Brewhouse, both in Ballard and in Renton. I'm a big fan of their beer and a big fan of Frank and Sean, the owners. And thanks for listening to this podcast. And what do you have to say, Alex? A lot of times you let me just ramble to the end and then you leave them hanging. So you, for once, take a goddamn stance at the end of the podcast too.
You have the whole promotion aspect. I don't have anything to promote, so I just appreciate your company. That's all.
I don't know, Chuck Woo. This has got to be a bot, but this is good morning, everyone. In what time zone is this person that it's the morning? There's no way these are real comments from a poor sports fan here.
That's a made up name, man. That's the kind of name that they put on a Nintendo game from back in the day.
Got a guy sitting cleanup for the Seattle Salmon baseball team. All right, we've gone too far off the rails. Bye, everybody.
Bye.